Ready? All right, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the joint City Council and Parks and Rec meeting, lunch and learn meeting. Today, I'll call the meeting to order and ask Nicole to take roll call, please.
Blake?
Here.
Carberry Montgomery?
Here. Here.
Bernie?
Here.
Obrecht?
Here.
Booyer?
Here.
Devine?
Here.
Linhart?
Here.
Hutchison?
Here.
Mayberry? Richardson?
Here.
And Parkin?
Here.
Excellent, thank you.
All right, thank you, Nicole, and I'll ask for a motion and a second to approve the agenda.
So moved.
Motion by McBurney, second by Kroll. Any further discussion? If not, roll call, please.
All right, McBurney?
Yes.
Kroll?
Yes.
Blake?
Yes.
Carberry Montgomery?
Yes.
Obrecht?
Yes.
Booyer? Devine?
Yes.
Linhart?
Here.
Hutchison?
Yeah.
Richardson?
Yes.
Parkin?
Yes.
Thank you.
All right, the hardest two parts are done. Those are the two votes, so we don't need to take any more votes, so. With that, we are going to move on to our agenda, and at first is to discuss the Community Recreation Complex Plan update, and I will turn it over to our Parks and Rec Director, Jan Herke. Jan, welcome back.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor, members of the council and commission, this is a big day and lots of meetings and a lot of commitment by a lot of people to get to this stage today. So our goal, hopefully by the end of this meeting, is one that you get the input and information you need and can provide us some direction of moving forward and reaction to some of the costs that are proposed for the project. So I want to acknowledge some of the staff here today of Scott Hoke and Molly Wilhite, as well as John Conier, have been very instrumental in working with the other staff and the firm to get to this stage today. So also here today is Nathan Harris and Jack Patton from RDG, and I'll do the introduction here and then pass it on to them. So we're going to just be covering today, I don't have to read all of these, but we have stepping through the process, and certainly as questions come up, certainly let us know. So I know that both the commission and council have been through this process already, but just wanted to give a quick summary in regards to the background of how we got here and why this project is important, not only obviously to the Parks and Rec Department, but we feel pretty important to the community as well, where our master plan in 2018 identified that there was a pronounced challenge to the Department of Parks and Recreation in facing the lack of indoor community and recreation space to conduct programs and meet the needs of a growing and diverse community. So that kind of spearheaded us in regards to realizing that was a significant need. And then in January and April, we did the 2 community surveys, some very positive support and results from those surveys were 84% of the community that the registered voters that were surveyed were in favor of this project, and 61% were okay with the proposed tax impact of the project. And that continues to be the questions that were in those 2 surveys are also consistent with what we're moving forward with and will be recommending in regards to the cost for the project. And we had the privilege of hiring RDG Planning and Design in July. So we've been working since then to get again to the stage today with cost estimates, preliminary designs, and operations planning. And some of you were able to attend the community input sessions. We had 3 in-person input sessions at the end of October. And then we also had the opportunity to provide an online option. That information invitation went out to over 20,000 people, and I think that's a conservative number in regards to all of our social media contacts, all of our contacts through the city, as well as every family in the Urbandale School District, the schools in Waukee, elementary schools in Waukee, all the civic groups, all the sports associations. So we certainly wanted to be thorough and make sure that people were aware of the project to start this education process, as well as make the available to share their input to get to this stage today. So I'm going to hand over the microphone here and to Jack with RDG, and he can share more about the process for community input that we did.
Well, thank you. We're pleased to be here. Hope the lunch is good and that the content is something that helps that all settle well. Community input is key to the idea of considering community recreation space. Well, what is that? That could be something to one of your constituents and something slightly different to another. Well, it's baseball, of course, that's recreation. For other people, it may be other things. Some people, it's even less physical activities. So we had an opportunity. We're very pleased to be involved in this process, I should start with. We let people know that this is not new ground for us to plow. As an individual, I get to work in recreation nearly every day of every week. So the idea of bringing people together to build community, to build opportunity, to improve personal and physical wellness is a really important, valued component of true, good recreation facilities. An important thing about perhaps the design team, why is an architect involved? We are here involved in building a wrapper for the programs that exist. The programs that you all administrate, that the Parks and Recreation Group puts together, and it's within this building that those things can occur. If you have a family, there are things that happen inside the house that are part of the family unit, right? There are things that happen inside of a recreation building that can't happen just out on a creek bed someplace else. So we love the opportunity to help with this, to get input from the community and understand beyond the statistically valid surveys that the CellCirc company put together, what would this community today contemporarily seek to have in a recreation space? And we went about a multi-pronged approach. One was to speak human to human interactively in 3 different open houses. And those open houses had multiple stations. So we got a little bit of different data from a 7-year-old than we did from 43-year-olds. But the target was to tackle information from both because they're all part of this growing community. And we used a variety of things shown on the screen. We took a whole series of images and people used colored dots to vote for the spaces they thought they would use the most and the spaces they would use the less. We also had Nathan Harris at a table with building blocks, and we'll talk about that, but people began to look at how would these spaces fit? Why is it important for this space to have natural light? What makes this space valuable? The kids participated. We had a big idea board, and we had the opportunity to really talk about a lot of input. So the physical open house occurred at 3 different locations over the past few weeks. We also distributed information electronically and had a large number of voting participants that weighed in. So the dot voting exercise is shown on the screen, brought about 64 images that we shared. So when we say a wood gym, what do we mean? Well, it doesn't have turf in it. It's different than a turf gym. We talked about multi-purpose rooms and how those feel and what they mean. That's different than a council chambers. This room, you can only do so many things in this half of the room. But multi-purpose rooms can do a lot of things for many people, all focused on recreation, community building, and community gathering. So individuals had an opportunity to convey their interest in each of the spaces, affirming those spaces they liked the most and ones that they didn't think were as necessary. Here we began to move these building blocks across the building site. And in these 3 examples, the black is parking. The blocking diagrams indicate the way people thought they should best organize their house, right? The design of this building across the project site. You have a fantastic project site in a tremendous location in the heart of your community. And sure, it's to one side of the community when you look at the total land ownership you have, but it serves a really critical and important need. And we found people that affirmed and understood that. In this diagram, the purple zone is kind of a wetlands area. Beautiful views into that part of the park. And so people organized their views around there. In the upper left image, somebody thought pickleball is too loud. So they moved the pickleball and the noise from pickleball, bunk, 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 they moved that as far away from the building as they could. So people expressed a lot of interest in these spaces. They understood the spaces, they laid them out, and they became part of a collaborative design process. We have designs to share today that build on the idea of some of those considerations. We had the younger set work with us to talk about things they felt should occur inside of a recreation center, and cast their own set of dots on separate boards, a big idea table, and then perhaps the image in the middle is really far more important than the way it seems visually. At the open house, speaking about this new community center that you're speaking about in this complex, both indoor and outdoor spaces, people learned, in this case, from Jan about all the other things going on in the city of Urbandale. This is not a one project enterprise that you have. And you have things going on for your community, for recreation across the stream of the entire community of Urbandale. I think that was an important recollection and understanding for so many. The QR code on the right simply linked people. We've had 500 and some different responses to those community surveys. Last couple slides here in this overall quick analysis is when individuals were asked about the program spaces they would like to have in a community center, what spaces they would most use. The ones on the upper floor, these indoor spaces, were the most affirmed spaces, regardless of in-person dot voting, as simple and straightforward that is, or electronic voting. These were an indoor walking, jogging track, a wood gymnasium, so a place for interior court sports, multi-purpose activity and meeting rooms, everything from meeting spaces, family gatherings, a Zumba class, things that could be used for high and low activity, and an indoor playground, a place to take grandchildren, children, and friends. And we heard a lot of support about 3 primary outdoor spaces, namely pickleball, a spray ground, that's an outdoor pool, 1.5 inches deep, right, where there's a lot of water and play activities, and you can burn off a lot of calories out there, and an outdoor playground. People have a struggle spending money and resources on things like locker rooms, and maybe we don't really need a commercial kitchen, maybe a small catering kitchen would serve, and others could bring food in, because when families gather inside your meeting rooms, it appears they like to eat, right? So a place to just bring these kinds of things in and consume. And not a lot of support for tennis. As we looked at these spaces, we also heard from almost 600 respondents with regard to a survey. I will say that this survey data came in, it closely parallels the in-person voting, but I want to affirm some things Jan said with regard to community input. Your team at the city has made this project known. For those in the city that don't know about it from their social media feeds, from the digital information they've received, from the information they've received through districts, from the information that's been mailed to their home, maybe it's evident they're not reading kind of the stuff they get. So there's information out there about this project, and there's more information to share as you go forward, should you elect to proceed into next year's activities for this. We heard a lot of good input. These kinds of spaces that were most affirmed are in rank order in the images on the right. An indoor jogging, walking track, a place to have a lunch walking meeting, a place to get in and pound out the miles, a place to recreate and socialize. Indoor playground, largely a younger set than most of us in this room, but a place to get in, burn off the steam, extend your activity time in cold winter months, which we see a lot of in this community. Multi-purpose activity rooms, places to meet, socialize, exercise, and be engaged. And the wood court gymnasium spaces for everything from badminton to pickleball to basketball to volleyball, large group dance, assemblies. And we had a rank order of them on the left side based on the dot voting survey. When we move outside, the 3 on the right are in rank order. A great outdoor, soft surfaced, fun to recreate play space. Jump, move, tumble, roll. And these spaces are no longer just for the able-bodied. We can actively design an ADA compliant and a facility that's really functional for people of all physical abilities and walks. The spray garden begins to look at imagery that captivated people about the ability to walk, spray, splash, turn the water off. It becomes a great outdoor space to have a reception at as well, right? So these things can become much more than just a playground activity. And then the third slide on the right in the lower right speaks about outdoor activity spaces that give me choices and outdoor variety activity. So places to move, recreate, be active, socialize, gather as a community. The survey data was dominated with almost 2/3 of the respondents in a very active age group of 35 to 54. The votes that came in on the survey were distributed roughly 50%, or 150% of, I shouldn't say it that way, a little skewed to the western population of your community. So 315 of the votes that have come in online through the past, up to a day and a half ago, were west of the interstate, a slightly smaller number on the right side. There was no restriction for people interested in these open houses or in the online surveys, and they could vote whether they were a resident of Grimes or whether they were a resident of Van Meter. They came and participated, and their votes are identified in 65 non-residents. Last bit of information on the background community data from the online survey. While the rank order is different of the top indoor spaces, the top 4 remain the most active and interested 4 spaces inside of a building that would serve your community as a community center. The 3 outdoor spaces, again, parallel the votes that were cast in the dot voting. So we had a lot of consistency throughout. We will take and we'll talk through the program information. So from what we heard to how we put these things potentially into a building and the kind of space they take, Nathan will walk through that information. If I were to summarize in closing, the last bit of information about the community is that there is still a strong interest in a pool, which is not part of this project. And several people expressed an interest in that. And then when they understood the budget limitations, the cost differential between this and the other indoor spaces that you're looking at, and when most of them who had not heard about your relationship with the city of Clive and the ability to share some of their facilities for a resident rate, they were quite content with where this project was headed. It took steam off, but I think you have a community that well understood the differential and a good next step and supported this project overall. We also heard people, about 120 people, 133 people signed in to all of the open houses, but most of them were signing in for themselves, plus one or plus a family. So we think we saw just under 200 people that came in and actively participated. We did not run into a wave of despair or a wave of overt criticism. We found people that were very interested in what could happen in the community, were engaged in the design process, and spoke very freely. And so we have a whole variety of content that we share at any time, but we saw very strong support for where you're at in this process.
So next we want to talk about the program, kind of some of those spaces that are being considered for the Recreation Center complex itself. So first, looking at the outdoor spaces, much of this was touched on in the surveys, but here in bold are those top 3 that rose in both the in-person open houses and the online survey. But spaces being considered holistically, being that spray ground, public toilets that can be accessed from the outdoors at 24/7, the pickleball courts, the regional playground, outdoor activity space, those are those options, and then some sort of shade structure. So all of these were kind of touched on and being considered as part of the site development. Looking at the indoor space, the bold ones, once again, those top 4 that consistently rose to the top. Others listed will definitely support and elevate and kind of round out the rest of the program. Obviously, we'll have an entry, a social space that people would come into and gather, some other wellness and stretching space, active areas, the multi-purpose rooms based on the program needs, looking at different sizes, different quantities of these spaces. The meeting and community rooms, similarly, we'll look at different quantities, sizes, how do we break down and provide rooms and spaces of all different sizes for different user groups using those spaces. Looking out at outdoor patio activity space, so whether that's adjacent to an activity room that you could do an outdoor yoga class or other spaces or activities that could happen outside on an elevated patio space. That wood gymnasium that Jack hit on, all kinds of uses within that space based on that flooring material. The walking jogging track around those gymnasium. We heard the locker rooms, maybe that is a different size, capacity, based on the need and the feedback we heard on that program element. Public restrooms, obviously, to serve all of those community and activity spaces. That indoor playground, once again, one of those top 4 popular spaces. Admin offices, and then looking at a library drop spot located within this space. Currently looking at a footprint of about 74,000 square feet for all of these different spaces, or a blend of these spaces to be included. That maybe rolls me right into budget alignment. Looking at a target for a bond referendum at $43 million would be our kind of total project cost. A large portion of that then would be construction target at the 28 million. That would be today's dollars. Then built into the soft costs would be the remaining design fees, inflation, FF&E, other things that would be necessary to facilitate that construction and operation of the building and site and complex in general. So that's kind of the number breakdown for that budget alignment. Based on the program spaces we've heard positive affirmation for and developed, we looked at that target budget of 28 million and came to that 74,000 gross square feet for the building. And then Darren Barr with Ballard King, believe is online, that can run through the operations portion of the presentation here. Darren, are you online?
I am here. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much for taking the time. So as we went ahead and began to put the operational plan together, we made some assumptions as it related to the end building. So hours of operation, very consistent with what we would call a traditional community center, giving you over 90 hours of access a week. We worked with staff to go ahead and identify full-time staffing positions that will be required to operate the facility and use city pay rates to go ahead and come up with those numbers, factoring in approximately 35% of salaries for benefits. Part-time staff, we did some work with you approximately a year and a half, 2 years ago, maybe even just a year ago now, but those rates have increased pretty significantly. So that was an impact on the budget, but we thought it was important to go ahead and make those assumptions now, especially knowing that you can be a couple of years out from construction. And the other factor that we took a look at is adding some custodial staff in the evening time, but that would be through a contract vendor. The next slide goes ahead and begins to talk about some of the recreation and revenue opportunities that exist. Obviously, things like fitness classes and recreation programs will have fees associated with them, and those can vary based on the level of specificity of the activity and level of instruction required. It's important, obviously, with the feedback we received on the walking track to point out that the access to the walking track is free. We came up with some daily drop-in recommended fees, and those you see there on the screen. As the program of the facility gets further refined, there could be some adjustments in those. So what it might cost an individual to come in and access the basketball court versus what it might cost to access an indoor playground could have some variability. We want to make sure that we vet those out with the staff and the grand scheme of things, make sure that we're not going to go ahead and overwhelm the people at the front desk with the various fee structures, but also understanding that there's approximately a 30% upcharge for non-residents. It's also important to understand that you don't have to necessarily pay an admission fee when you're going to go ahead and participate in programs. That's consistent whether you're talking about a membership-based facility or a non-membership-based facility. So there are other rental opportunities that are there, basketball courts, multi-purpose rooms, the idea of potentially renting the full facility for a project after prom or project graduation. I worked in a facility where that was so popular that the facility schedule almost predicated the graduation date. So I'm actually not joking when I say that, but these facilities definitely go ahead and get embraced by the community as a whole and are seen as a place of gathering and recreating and socializing. So the reality of that is the next slide, which starts to talk about operational ranges. Facility of this nature, you're talking about expenses in the $1.2 to $1.4 million, revenues in that 450 to 550 range. The other thing that I think is important to talk about when you start talking about revenues is that this facility goes ahead and allows the Parks and Recreation Department to go ahead and expand their program offerings and the rental opportunities that they provide the community. It also goes ahead and provides a home base for activities that may have to take place in another location right now because of the space that the city may not have. Along with that, you're finding a subsidy of that $750,000 to $850,000. And then that goes ahead, and I think it's also important to note that within that $1.2 to $1.4 million expense line item, we've gone ahead and allocated $75,000 of that to go into what we would refer to as a sinking fund, so that there's a balance carried in that fund. So by years 5 through 10, when improvements or changes need to be made to the facility, there's a dollar amount available to go and address some of those needs. Tax implications for this, for a $200,000 home, is approximately $116 to $119 annually.
Thanks, Darren. This next slide really just hits on the breakdown of some of that tax implication. On the left, we've got that a column that hits on the lower side, a column on the right here that hits on that upper side. So it gives us that range based on our expenses and recovery. And that was kind of outlined in that last slide. The bottom lines really being that $116 to $119 per $200,000 of home value. Finally, then, we wanted to look into a potential design solution that starts to look at those program spaces pulled into a overall square footage, that $74,000 target. How does a building that big, the parking required for those occupants to use the building, how does that start to lay out on the site itself? So on the left, we've got a larger diagram that shows Meredith on the north, Aurora on the south, and then on the west flank being 152nd. So as Jack hit on, that kind of floodplain that runs through the creek is highlighted in that blue and purple swath. So that would be an area we'd avoid with construction. Moving on to the right image, kind of blowing up the actual project site itself. Looking at that proposed building footprint of that 74,000 square feet. Now this is, due to this beautiful site being sloped, it allows us to build a two-story building essentially in a walkout basement configuration. So from the west, we have a one-story elevation. Kind of keeps the mass of this building, definitely the two-story volume of the gym, at more of a human scale on that west side. And then allows us to cut into the hillside, tuck this in, and be able to give a two-story expression on the east side and have that great visibility to that natural setting to the east. The parking then sits itself along the west side of the site. Based on an estimated occupant count, we've kind of sized parking accordingly. And then we're able to develop and show the site amenities. Being a holistic complex, we want to think about the indoor and the outdoor. So to the south, we've got that regional playground, the spray ground, and some of that outdoor activity that was desired. Right now showing a little play structure right adjacent to the building on the west side there, thinking that could have some adjacency to the indoor playground, be able to move inside and outside of that space. Moving some of those outdoor classrooms adjacent to the multi-purpose or activity rooms down on the lower level, kind of having a fitness terrace down there based on some of that elevation change. To the north, showing some sort of future expansion option, and then showing the pickleball up to the north and adjacent to that parking for quick access to that. The smaller parking lot on the south, that 70 stall parking lot, looks to kind of serve some of that regional playground and spray ground. So then looking at initial perspectives, showing kind of the massing, the volume of this building. So this would be that front west elevation, looking at that from the parking lot, showing the main entry, and then some of the different building blocks that would push and pull depending on where the different program elements land within the overall floor plan. This would then be the potential east elevation, which would be that 2-story volume, allows us to get those views off to that natural setting there to the east. So in the foreground, you kind of see the fitness terrace, so that could be adjacent to some of those multi-purpose activity rooms. Looking at potentially putting the gathering rooms or the community rooms up above that with access to a terrace that you could get indoor, outdoor access from those spaces, and then showing kind of the larger gymnasium volume off here to the right. And then this would just be the perspective from that drop-off zone of that front entry, kind of creating that welcoming, clear entry point to the building. Centrally located, then you can move off to the north to certain program elements, move off to the south, and then have direct access down to that lower level from that entry point. So these are kind of preliminary massing, starting to show kind of some of that, the ability that this could create a nice setting based on the existing site and how we might capitalize on some of the natural aspects of that building, the building slope or the ground slope, tucking this in and kind of really nestling into a beautiful site overall. And then really we just wanted to end and open this up for questions, really just creating and emphasizing the importance of the need and those community members that will use this space, both indoor and outdoor, year-round. So with that, I'd love to open it up to questions, if you've got any.
All right. Questions, comments? How big an indoor track?
So the current program shows 3 courts, a 3-court gym. So that would go around the 3-court gym, which would be roughly 10.5 laps to a mile.
I saw a picture of this in one of the earlier slides, but I didn't really see mention of it. We've had people come to us asking about indoor pickleball courts. So is that what you're anticipating could be part of the gymnasium portion of it?
Yeah, definitely. That activity could take place on that wood gymnasium, the wood floor.
And how many basketball courts? You said 3?
3 basketball courts, yeah.
So all individually be rented out separately, right?
Right, we could bring down divider curtains and separate one court from the others, and then you could get 2 pickleball courts per
basketball court.
per basketball court. So you're looking at 6 indoor in the current thinking.
Did indoor turf not make the cut? Or
There was overall not a whole lot of support for it in the dot voting and the online survey. And based on budgetary restraints, that was one of those elements that we didn't hear a lot of support for. So it made sense to remove from the current thinking.
Another question I have is related to, for lack of a better term, like green elements. Like, have you considered solar or other sorts of solar panels? I see Jan shaking her head, and Scott. What sort of implementation, or what sort of environmentally friendly techniques are we using, or can we use, like you said, this is a unique natural area, so we would want to be sensitive to that in terms of drainage and things like that. So I guess if somebody can jump in and tell me what you're planning.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll start, and Jack, if you want to. But the site in general lends itself beautifully to being able to tuck the building in. So I think from a massing perspective, we get that smaller scale, but how that relates, I think we get to use some of that, the geothermal ability from the ground that we've dug into. It allows us to be able to plug into that geothermal opportunity. The site itself being oriented along that hillside, kind of along the north-south orientation, also helps from a solar heat gain perspective. Being in a cooling environment most of the year, we can reduce that southern exposure and start to capitalize on some of the eastern and western sunlight for those heat gain purposes. And then using as much of that passive design for air circulation through the building is a great ability, using those eastern and western elevations to move that through. And then definitely those considerations for high efficiency mechanical systems, the green roof possibility, the solar is all something that we'll consider as we work towards a budgetary alignment with the program and how we can incorporate as much of that as possible.
Thank you.
Just a quick clarification. You mentioned geothermal opportunities. Does that mean actively using geothermal, or is it just based on the land and how it's structured?
I think both are a possibility. I think that, once again, goes to if that's a desire that we want to capitalize on that, we just need to move forward with an understanding that that's a goal for the project, for the community, and work that into our cost model.
Thank you.
So in your 74,000 proposal, you have no kitchen proposed in that?
Right now, we're holding 600 square feet for a catering kitchen. I think that has the ability to mold at this point, but that's what we're holding for a square footage. Whether that becomes a singular space or whether that becomes a mix of shared between community rooms or whether that's dedicated. So there's a lot of flexibility still, but currently holding that 600 square feet.
And so just to be clear, so the amenities that you laid out and were voted on, are those set in stone, or are you still going back and taking all this in and going to give us a plan, or like, is the playground, the gym, or the wood floors, the track, those are for sure in? Like, what are I wasn't clear to me what amenities are in or not in.
Mm-hmm. So in the current floor plan, all of those that were listed are included in what we've currently been thinking and where we've kind of aggregated at that 74,000 square feet. What we were happy to hear from the community is a very concentrated and agreeable top amenities from all of that input, even the statistically valid surveys done earlier this year. They all align with, I think, the majority of the community understanding those top needs, being those top 4 indoor and then the top 3 outdoor. All of those that were on the screen today are being considered. It's just how do we mix and match and understand. We need, if we would have heard from the community that group exercise rooms are the top thing or community rooms are the top thing, we just need to understand that we've got a square footage and we can move quantities and numbers of those different spaces.
Okay, thank you.
So that would be able for the capacity for everything too. So capacity in multi-rooms for the playground, because I'm just trying to think of a small playground, big playground, 3 multi-purpose, 2 multi-purpose, but that's still all flexible.
Yes, it is. We as a design team and the steering committee have approached that with this is what we think we need based on their programming needs and the affirmation from the community. So we've kind of started to hone in on that, but yeah, definitely still flexible at this point.
So the goal, after input from you today, is the December 13th council meeting is when more firmed up concept plans will be brought to you. We want to make sure today that we're on the right track, that the input from the community and what's presented today, if you're supportive of that, if you're comfortable with the dollar amount that we're proposing, obviously square footage and dollar amount and what amenities if all of a sudden your ideas change, we need to get some direction on that. But December 13th would be more of the specific, here's how many community rooms and square footage and how many gyms, more of a visual at that time, as well as we will be bringing to the council proposed wording for the bond referendum question. So between now and December 13th is when we'll be working closely with RDG to firm up. Today is, are we on track? Are you comfortable with the community said they're comfortable with for the cost? And then we'll continue to work on this for more finalized, firmed up on December 13th.
And Jan, will Parks and Rec be reviewing this at their November, or at their next meeting too, ahead of that council meeting then?
We may be having to do a special meeting and just to get with the timing of that for the Park and Rec Commission.
Okay.
Because the timing, we want to make sure that RDG has as much time as possible to take the information. But yes, that would be something to make sure that the Park and Rec Commission has input and direction going to council.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, because I might be getting in the weeds with it, but, because, I'm a minority, even the night when I was there for the open house, the kitchen, but once we started talking about like, oh, I need to go take my red dot off. Because if anybody's ever had graduations, wedding receptions, all that stuff, a catering kitchen can not necessarily. That's why that was kind of, like I said, getting in the weeds on this stuff in the outside restrooms, but I'll save all that.
We appreciate that, Betty. One of the issues that came up at the Walnut Hills meeting, which is the meeting that was held closest to the proposed site, the actual site, was vehicular access through the residential areas to the west. I know I spoke at length to Doug Adamson after the meeting, and I talked to AJ. And have you guys addressed how we'll handle that issue?
Yeah, I think if I can, back up to the site design, one aspect that we looked at, so that feedback from that individual was a lot of through traffic of those two southernmost, connector roads to 152nd. What we've done in this design is started to lay out those access points to the parking to the further north than those two to mitigate the direct traffic through those two connection points.
And a lot of this would go through the site planning process too. We would work with community planning on making sure we did things that aligned. But yeah, the goal would be to encourage the traffic to come in off of Meredith. That's going to be a more direct route, or probably a quicker route for people to get in and out of. So again, we heard that concern and trying to manage that.
I mean, we have to acknowledge that those are private streets built to different standards, not meant for through traffic. So if we could get in our Wayback Machine, and 20 years ago, I think we could have done some better site plan in this area, but we have what we have. So I just want to make sure that we are keeping that top of mind, because we don't want to be putting any more traffic than already is not supposed to be going through those private streets.
And we did have some communication with the management group a little bit. We
Okay.
tried to get an in-person meeting, but our calendars just kept getting crossed. So we did have some communication
Okay.
with one of the two in regards to what concerns we could help with. And I think that helped a little bit too for us.
Okay, well, I hope you'll keep working on that.
I had a question on numbers, and actually on the bright side, with the extra traffic, it might meet the threshold for a stop sign on that road. So the counts that you have, it was like 200 in person and roughly 600. Is that correct? In your expertise, is that a good number for the size of this community and the feedback that you'd like to get based on past experience?
Yeah, I think we were very happy with it, especially with the timing of it all. It was quick respondents, and a lot of people showed up and gave great feedback. The survey, online survey in particular, took off immediately, and we definitely saw spikes in those votes and every time that a communication was sent out via those different channels. So each time Parks and Rec was able to send out a different blast, we saw those spikes in the online survey respondents. So we were very happy to see that quantity that fast as well.
If I can share as well, we were very encouraged as well, whenever you can have consistency, and for what we presented earlier, the master plan from both surveys, and remember Ann Seltzer saying usually she only gets one opportunity for one survey in a community, and having that consistency, and then all of these meetings with the public, there seemed to be the support and a consistent feedback, so that was encouraging to us as well.
Are we able to see a price breakdown of different amenities? Because one of the things that kind of struck my attention was the potential for a library drop-off or some sort of miniature kiosk. Not something I anticipate taking up a lot of square footage or requiring a whole lot of man hours to associate with running it. Is there any way that we can see some of these cost breakdowns on the different amenities that are being proposed once we start getting into the weeds of it?
The answer is yes. I think that either preceding our December 13th session or at that session, as we readily tabulate the different cost values for the different components in this building. And those cost values are based on what's in each space, as well as the size of each space. To think about the library drop box, it's a total of about 9 square feet. So it's a very, very small animal, but that scales up differently when you're talking about a gymnasium. We'd be happy to summarize that based on construction costs.
Yeah, I just don't want to see a proposal brought to us that incorporates the top ideas and only those ideas. Just want to make sure that we're looking at some of those other options that may have fit more that middle of the road to see if one particular item doesn't necessarily suit that area, or if we think it's driving up the cost, we can look at a different option to incorporate into that.
Be happy to share that data.
Where would, so we have 2 on each side, the pickleball courts we know will be very popular, and then the regional playground splash pad. Do we have either attached to the building or separately restroom access for both of those parts of the building? I think that's imperative based on our past experience.
And Councilwoman, you're speaking about access from the outside, maybe without going into the building.
Right.
And in the cost model, there is space for those components. As eventually get into a design, we want to talk about how secure they are, what kind of hours of operation there are. But keeping traffic indoors and outdoors is very viable in this solution.
Okay, great.
And I'll just say, because Jen asked the question broadly, if we think this is a good idea or not. I think this is what I anticipated, and I think the price point is good. And of course, it goes to the voters eventually anyway, so they will be the ultimate deciders of this. As somebody with a 2-year-old and one on the way, which I don't know if I've said that to everybody, I'm expecting it. But
Now it's out there, man.
now it's out there. Whoa! Whoops! But anyway, I know that in the winter months in particular, we struggle finding children's activities indoors that you can take a 2-year-old, a toddler. And this is covering a heck of a lot of bases with it. And I think this will be, I mean, and I belong to Lifetime, and even Lifetime wouldn't have some of these kind of amenities. So I think this is extreme, for at least young parents and with young children, I think this is covering a lot of bases, and I'm very excited to see this move forward.
Remind me again of our timeline.
So being the March 7th vote date, if that is voted affirmative, we would move right in then to schematic design, would push through the rest of the design phase, the remainder of that year, potentially into maybe the first month or two of 2024. Then we would go out for bids at that point, and then probably take roughly, I'd say 13 to 16 months to build. So looking at beginning of 25 would be an opening time target.
Thank you.
All right. Any further comments or questions? All good discussion. All right, so
Thank you so much.
thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you for the update. And Jan, I think we have what you need for now, some good comments. We'll have this further discussion at P&Z again, or excuse me, at Parks and Rec before, ahead of the council meeting, and then at our December 13th council meeting, so.
Great. We appreciate your continued support, and we'll keep working hard to bring the information forward in December.
All right, thank you. Then we'll move on to item 3.2, and that's the discussion on the local option sales and service tax. AJ? Nikki?
Yeah, this is definitely a tag team. So, Mr. Mayor, thank you. Members of council and the commission, thank you for your patience in sitting in on this as well. One of the things as council members, you know that we are currently engaged in our CIP process at a staff level. And that's always an interesting time of year because it's typically we have project lists this long and we have a monetary list this long. So we have to do that balancing act. And those of you who have been through it, and all of you have been through it at least one time, is you would understand that we have projects that are in their first several years that are in design and construction and moving forward. They usually get replaced by other projects. So one of the things that when we looked at the process of the CIP is obviously the financial impact and how we're going to afford to do all this. And so, as we've explained to the council and the community before, there's two ways that you can do this. One way is that, and traditionally the Urbandale way has been that we look at our existing tax levy, debt service levy, and the funds that we have available and fit our projects to meet that. The other way to do that, and other communities have, they look at the list of projects and they alternate or they elevate and lower their tax rate or other funding sources to meet those projects. We continue to do this is the barriers in which the financial barriers that we pre-established that we work within. One of the things that we looked at when we passed the local option sales and service tax as an option was to utilize those funds coming in on the Polk County side. The Dallas County side had been approved, and we're utilizing those funds to pay off the debt for the fire station number 43. That will be completed, and those monies will be freed up in 2026. The recently, and I'll say recently, approved local option sales tax for the Polk County side is generating monies that, as we presented to council, that those funds would be used to retire debt. That existing debt that we've borrowed to retire that and then work our way to a program where we were going to self-fund with the local option sales tax and other outside funds, capital improvement projects. We've hit a bit of a glitch, and we wanted to bring council up to date on that as we plan through our presentation that will be forthcoming, beginning on November 28th at CIP committee about the use of those local option sales tax and where we are with various projects and the financial issues that we're currently faced with. I'm going to turn it over to Nikki real quick because she is much more adept to explaining that more succinctly than I am. So I also wanted easier access to the door before, so she'll have to trip after me. No, all seriousness, this is something that from a staff level, we are, Nikki and I have spoken about this. We think this is, I'll put my pitch in at the beginning, this is the appropriate way to take this issue forward at this point in time, given some of the circumstances that we're faced with.
Short and sweet, we're out of money. How about that? So as we've looked through this everybody has seen what the Fed is doing to the interest rates. We've been watching it extremely carefully. We normally go out for our bond sale in April, so we're quite a ways out. West Des Moines sold a couple of weeks ago, and they're over 5%. So our environment has changed a lot. So it's no longer as cheap to borrow money, which is still okay. We're still going to have to borrow money. However, our plans that we've been walking through the last 3 years, we've called and retired almost $20 million in debt, which is great, except now I'm paying off 5% bonds with 5% plus bonds. So we're not going to do that. I think that time has passed. We are flexible enough to be able to deal with that. The things that I wanted to talk to you about is, so in this current fiscal year that we're already in, the budget allows for 3.4 million is what we're going to call and pay off in the spring. I don't think that's going to make sense. We still have 6-ish months to watch, but I don't think it's going back down in the next 6 months. So it won't make much sense to use those local option sales tax dollars that I will have on hand at that time. And instead, we will roll that into the CIP for the 2023 issue that we're planning for now and the committee will get to see. So instead, diverting those funds and actually cash flow projects instead. So what that means and what I want to make sure, the only commitment I'm asking for direction on is for the 2023 bond issuance that we're getting ready to set. If we're comfortable that 3.4 million should roll into a project instead, and then we can make that decision each year. We don't have to lock in and say we're going to do it also for the 2024, but I have a almost $5 million gap that year too. So the cost of projects is pretty much the same. We didn't really add much for new projects, but the cost went significantly higher. We already knew 170th Street was going to come in high. You all had that discussion after we set the budget last year and when we accepted those bids of, by the way, we have to pay the bill now. So that's what it is. So we won't have to do that for 2024 necessarily, but we will watch. I still don't think it will lower that much. Even 18 months from now, I think we'll still probably be in the same situation. The only impact that really has is I can no longer, when we were calling and paying off the bonds, we can then lower the debt service levy 10 cents. So the debt service levy will stay the same. We cannot lower it if I'm not going to call and pay off bonds. So I just want to give you a heads up if that's the direction that we're using for the CIP that we're planning, mostly to have a stop sign if you are not comfortable with that, because then we'll have to go through and cut projects. So that was kind of the direction we wanted to make sure. Obviously, we've been talking about it, that the interest rate environment's changing a lot. Now it's real bad compared to where we've been. So it's just a shift in our plan. We're still on track. We'll still have the funds. They're coming in well with the local option sales tax. But the planned 3.4 million will not happen. We were supposed to retire 2 bonds in the spring of April 23. But I will hold off on that and instead assume to build it into cash flow, a project. Everybody is okay with that.
And correct me if I'm wrong, most cities don't do what we do when it comes to using their lost funds to pay down bond. Most use it for projects, right? So in some ways, we'll just be doing the norm versus.
Correct. So it's the 50-50 rule. So they're using their 50%. The way what we would be doing now is I'm going to pay for a project instead of levying for a debt service. So it's still the same idea. Ours is just a lot more transparent of I'm literally paying off bonds, that the levy still comes down. It's the same net effect. So absolutely, it was just really very clear. You're literally retiring that debt versus, but we're still having to issue bonds. So they're just doing the net effect, which is what we are doing.
Right. We'll still meet the requirements of the law.
Oh, yeah.
And I think this makes sense. I was just.
Because we're still doing both sides are still providing property tax relief the same as it was before. Even 50% was capital projects and the whole laundry list of things that we had in our voter question, and then 50% for property tax relief. If we didn't use it to fund these projects, I would have to increase my levy to pay for it. So we are inherently providing property tax relief as well. So short of not doing the projects, which 170th you have to, we already signed the contract for that. Those pieces, we want to still be able to do those and would require a levy.
So one of the reasons we were doing this was to get us to a point where we're using loss to do projects and not have to really borrow as much money. And I think we projected 5 years.
Yeah, so in the 6th year, we would have been doing that. So 2026 is the year we call and pay off the fire station bonds, which we will still have that discussion those were set aside for the Dallas County. We're still on track to do that piece of it.
Right.
But the Polk County side, we should have gotten to the point that we would be able to cash flow $8 million worth of capital projects starting in '27. So this would delay that
That was
for
gonna be the
sure.
question, okay.
Because now I'm using the money that would have retired those bonds, and then it kind of the trickle-down effect. So that snowball will start rolling in, so it will extend that period. We would still work towards that. We're down to a 10-year bond. We're shortening it really a lot. So we're still working towards that, and I think it's still achievable, but it is not going to happen in the next 3 years as planned. Any other questions on that? It is what it is. I don't have a crystal ball, but I definitely know it's not going down before April, so I'm pretty comfortable that the spring '23 does not make sense to do that.
Absolutely, that makes sense.
Okay, so we will continue to create the document with that 3.4 million diverting to projects. Great.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. All right, with that, nothing further on the agenda. We are adjourned. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for spending your time with us.
Don't forget to vote.
Yes.